Hi, thanks for joining me. I recently did a presentation for a group called TRANSAFE WA that I'm involved in on workplace psychological safety. And I promised them that I'd put it together in a webinar for them so that they could showcase that for their members. And today I'm doing just that. And I'd just like to take this opportunity before I start the presentation to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am today and which many of you are, and also to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to any viewers of this with an Indigenous background. So in between chatting with you, I'm going to be sharing screen and I'm going to be working out how this webinar style works, so please bear with me. But I think the information that's presented today will be really useful, and I think you're definitely going to get a lot out of it. And so, as I mentioned today, the presentation is on workplace psychological safety. And a little bit about me. So my name's Niomi Hurley. I'm the founder of Get Up and Grow Consulting. So I have a passion for creating greatness in individuals, teams and organisations. And I've worked within safety and HR roles pretty much for my whole career. My most recent position, though, before starting my business was in a transport company. And so I bring a lot of knowledge from that transport company and those roles I held into what I do in the consulting world. So today we're going to look at psychological safety, as well as doing a whole heap of growth and learning, which is a passion of mine. I have done some extensive study in psychology, and then coupled with the HR and the safety, I've been able to put together this presentation to give you a bit of an idea on what's going to be coming with the changes of the legislation. So our legislation is changing and is coming into effect the 31st of March. So I've just come up with a date. And so this is going to be a really important element for us to go through in the psychological safety space. And today I'm just going to be covering what is psychological safety, the importance of risk management, what are psychosocial hazards, management and prevention of those hazards, and just at the end, kind of why should you care? So firstly, let's look at what is psychological safety. So psychological safety is about being able to act and engage in a team without fear of negative consequences. So it's being able to interact with members of the team without fear of any bullying, harassment, violence, aggression, discrimination, misconduct, or unresolved conflict. And psychological safety is really, in a nutshell, about giving an environment where your employees feel safe. And not just feel safe from a physical perspective, but also feel safe from a psychological perspective. And these new legislative changes that are coming in are actually changing the focus from the physical to also including the psychological. And so although just morally and, you know, from a care factor, we really should have been doing this a long time ago, it is actually now becoming something that is law, something that we're going to be required to do, something that we're going to be accountable for. And so in Western Australia, as I mentioned, this legislation is coming in on the 31st of March. So it's really timely right now just to get an idea of what it's going to look like, what it is, and what it means to you. And so there are 4 quadrants to psychological safety. We've got the learner safety, the challenger safety, collaborator safety, and inclusion safety. And all 4 of those come together as the typical psychologically safety model. So with learner safety, you know, we want to make sure it's safe to ask questions and experiment and learn from mistakes. And challenger safety, we want people to be able to challenge, we want people to be able to come up with different ideas, express those, speak up if there's something that they feel like could be done better, or even just something they would like to challenge. Collaboration, making sure your environment is open for all parties to collaborate. There's no discrimination on levels of positions or ethnic backgrounds or anything like that. You know, you want to foster that constructive debate. And then inclusion safety, everyone's treated fairly. Everyone has that same voice, everyone is heard, and everyone's encouraged to openly contribute. And this is really important to be able to set the tone that actually encourages people to feel safe. Feel safe to be able to contribute, feel safe to be able to be challenged and to challenge, feel safe to learn, feel safe to be, collaborating, and also just feel that they're included, just feel that they have value and that they have worth within the organisation. So the importance of risk management. So firstly, we have a duty of care. All employers have a duty of care. And as an employer, you have a responsibility to provide and maintain, as far as practicable, a safe working environment for all of your employees. Now, duty of care in Western Australia, the law requires employers to provide a high standard of safety and health at their workplace. And ensure, as far as practicable, the employees are not injured or harmed because of their work. Now, I've just read that specifically from the legislation. And I think the key element that connects, so there's a list of different elements underneath the duties that employers are responsible for. And the two that I think are the most connecting in this position and relevant for sharing today are providing and maintaining workplaces, plant, and systems of work so your workers are not exposed to hazards. So we're going to look through in a moment at the psychological and psychosocial hazards, and providing information about any hazards and risks from the work. And so we'll actually look then also at this risk management process. Now, this is what we have to do. And in a normal safety sense, as all employers are doing that right now, you do have hazard identification, risk analysis, and then the implementations of controls to bring those down to ALARP. Now, ALARP is as low as reasonably practicable. And so we bring those down to ALARP, and then that actually not only meets our duty, but it provides that safe workplace for our employees. The same is going to be occurring from this new legislation, or from this point forward, on the psychosocial hazards. So if we look at now risk management, so risk management, basically we want to prevent and reduce the number and the severity of injuries and illnesses from the exposure hazards and risk factors. We want to promote worker health and wellbeing across the organisation. We want to identify and take opportunities. And that's those opportunities for continuous improvement and innovation, in the safety and health management systems. And as most businesses are aware, the risk management system is firstly identifying the hazards, identifying those hazards and their risk factors. And we're going to go through that in a moment on looking at what those psychosocial hazards are, then assessing those risks. Okay, how are they going to impact the business? What's the likelihood and what's the consequence? Then you put in controls against those risks. And then fourth, you monitor and review the effectiveness of those controls, because there's no point putting in controls and just leaving them and thinking, I should be right. You need to actually go back in and monitor those and see if they're effective. Get feedback, from your employees and from other people within the workplace, and see how you can improve those over time, because that is the continuous cycle of the risk management process. And so now I just want to share with you psychosocial hazards. What are psychosocial hazards? And psychosocial hazards are workplace hazards that are related to the psychological and social conditions of employees. They're related to the whole workplace, and they're actually a bit of a twist from traditionally what we've looked at, because traditionally we've looked at those physical conditions. And now we need to look more at the psychosocial. And, I've spent a lot of my career doing investigations within the safety space and within the HR space for a range of different things. And all of the incidents that I have done investigations for, we may have been able to find a root cause that was sitting at, a failed defence, or some other contributing factor, lack of systems, lack of training, all of those sort of things. But there was always an element of people in all of those. I mean, people, unless you've got a business that's fully automated and doesn't have people interaction, there's always going to be an influence of people. A majority of the time when we're investigating those incidents, what I was finding is the mindset of the person or where they were, their psychological space, had some influence over the incident. Now, it may not have been the root cause, and it may not have been a strong contributing factor in all cases, but it was always present. And so this is really important, not just to meet legislation, and not just because we've got the kindness in our heart, but also to reduce the incidents in your workplace. So I think the next thing we need to look at is what are psychosocial hazards? What are some examples of those? So we have work demands, inadequate support, poor leadership, lack of role clarity. You know, the list goes on, and you can read that now and you can read that list. But ultimately, what we're wanting to do is look at all of those areas of the business that affect people. Ultimately, how do they affect people? And one of my passions sits around leadership. And so not just the transport industry, I found in a lot of businesses I've worked with and now in my consulting area, a lot of leaders are promoted into roles because of their technical skills, yeah? So they've got really great technical skills, they're performing well, there's a gap in the business, and especially right now when we're experiencing skill shortages all over the place, we identify these people, we're going to think, great, we can trust them in that technical area, we're going to promote them up to being a leader, but we don't teach them. We don't teach them how to be a leader. And so we put them up there, and maybe their people skills aren't great. Maybe they have difficulty around having those difficult conversations. Maybe they're actually very self-invested. Maybe they're more focused on their own performance and their own shining rather than their team. I mean, there's a lot of different elements that come in there. So leadership is a really key factor. You know, also work demands. We've got this situation at the moment, as I said, where we've got skill shortages everywhere. And so we tend to, sometimes without realizing, have a higher expectation of our people. And we have a higher expectation by putting the work on them, by loading them up with work. And if they're performing and they're not speaking, you know, we continually do that. And unfortunately, the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, can be so true in a lot of businesses, because with the employees' workload going up, I mean, that makes the managers and the owners and the directors and the CEOs, all of their workloads gone up as well. And so sometimes when we think that there is no noise, we think that there are no problems. You know, we don't fix what ain't broke type scenario. But we need to be more conscious of what is actually going on in the business and making sure that we're setting up people for success from that psychological space. You know, workplace policies and procedures. There's a lot of businesses that kind of just wing it. They do their risk assessment, they put in a few procedures as controls for some of those hard hazards for physical safety, but there's nothing in place for the psychological safety. You know, how do you ensure that your employees are treated fairly, that their workloads aren't too much? You know, how do you ensure that your employees aren't fatigued on the job, that they're able to do their job well? You know, in the transport space, fatigue is a really big thing. You know, it's actually part of their accreditation requirements. So there's some strict rules around fatigue and how it's managed. But that's how it's managed in the workplace on a day-to-day basis on working hours. We're not actually looking at the type of work that people are doing a lot of the time. You know, is the type of work they're doing, you know, affecting their fatigue? And if so, how do we go and combat that? What controls can we put in place for that? Are we giving them and setting them up in the right space so that out of work, they're in the right headspace to get enough sleep, to be able to look after their bodies, to eat well, to be able to nourish themselves, all that sort of stuff. And I can keep going on, you know, isolated work, transport industry, that's a big one. There's a lot of transport companies that have long haul, have guys out there by themselves. Yes, they've got the radio, but there's a lot of time, and I know the drivers out there will relate to this, there's a lot of time to think. Yeah, there's a lot of time for that brain to just tick over those same scenarios, and then it starts wandering and starts creating things. And that can become a real issue in that psychological space, safety space. And the last one I'll just touch on right now is traumatic events. And I know I'm referring to transport a lot in this, but this presentation was designed for TRANSAFE. So I've got a lot of examples for that. But the traumatic space isn't just for, the paramedics out there and the first responders out there. There's people in the transport industry that are affected by this as well. And I know there was an incident in the business that I worked in where the truck in front was one of the trucks for the company I worked for. And then there was a caravan and car behind, and then another truck behind that. And the truck behind that was the one that made the mistake, not slowing down during roadworks, and caused a major incident. Now, it was on a main road. The driver in the truck in front that worked for the company I worked for, they were the first responder. They had to get out and they had to witness a dual fatality. They had to comfort the people's children that were in the back of the vehicle that had witnessed their parents being involved in this fatality. And that sort of stuff goes really deep. And, drivers also, traumatic events, there's times where drivers even have to put wildlife out of their misery if they hit wildlife on the road, and we don't think about those sorts of things. So there is a lot of trauma in the road transport environment that we really should be thinking of. So now we just want to talk about the management and prevention of the psychosocial hazards. So management and prevention sits around a few things. There's leadership and workplace culture. There's workplace behaviours. There's good work design. There's communication and consultation, information and training, and reporting and responding. Now, all of these things I've actually taken out of the codes of practice. So for businesses that are interested, there are 3 really great codes of practice that WorkSafe has put out. So the first one is Psychosocial Hazards in the Workplace. The second one is Workplace Behaviour. And the third one is Violence and Aggression at Work. And all of those codes of practice have all the information that I've gathered today and presenting to you. So for more information, it's as easy as going onto the WorkSafe WA website and getting this information. Now, I know that there's some businesses that are really busy and they might not have the ability, the resources, the time to be able to go in and do these sorts of things. Excuse me, but there's a lot of consultants like myself out there that you can reach out to that can help you with this. So looking at the management and prevention, communication and consultation. Communication and consultation is really key. We do all of that all the time. Information and training, not just giving them information on their job and training on their job, but information and training on those psychosocial risks and those hazards. Giving them training on what's in the work environment, what procedures and policies have you put in place to be able to target that. The reporting and the responding, giving yourself a culture, a reporting culture, so you know what's going on. For anyone that's been involved in major incidents before, simply saying, oh, I didn't know, and pleading that ignorance card does not cut it. It will not stop you from any of the litigations or any of the investigations that are done by the regulatory bodies. So you really need to be aware of what's going on. You can't fix what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, one of my favourite sayings. So you need to be able to understand what's happening in your business. Leadership and workplace culture, that's one of my passions. And it's something that we think, I put a barbecue on a Friday, I've got a great workplace culture, but that's not always the case. And, majority of people that leave a business leave the leader, they don't leave the business. And so there's a lot of indications that can let you know that your leadership do need some more development. And that could be your turnover, that could be the number of incidents, could also just be the attitude and the culture of your people. Now, again, you don't know what you don't know. We can't throw our leadership team under the bus if we haven't given them the training and the tools and the resources and the support they need to be able to display that great leadership throughout the company and throughout their teams. Workplace behaviours. What is an acceptable behaviour in your workplace? Banter is fine as long as banter isn't crossing the line. And a lot of people think that banter makes their culture. But as the world is changing, so are the places, the world of work. The workplaces are changing. You know, when I delivered this presentation live, I actually said, you know, 50 years ago, if I had told everyone in 50 years there'll be no one smoking in this room, people would have laughed at me. But that's how the world has changed. If I had told people 50 years ago or even 60 years ago that, you know, Indigenous populations would be voting and they wouldn't be classed as animals in our legislation, and women would be voting and women would be working in the workplace alongside men, I would have been laughed at. If I had told people that there was equality in marriage, you could marry for love, not gender, laughed at. And so our society is evolving and changing, and as it does, our places of work need to as well. So we need to keep up with that. We need to understand that our workplace behaviours, what may have been seen as banter in the past, could actually be now presenting as a psychosocial hazard. And I'm not saying take all the fun out of the workplace. I'm just saying make sure that it's adapting so that it is inclusive for everyone. And good work design, clearly designing your jobs, making sure you've got position descriptions, looking at the hours of your workers. Now, one of my pet hates is people that start really early and leave really late and aren't delivering results. So working hours can't be the only way that you monitor this. It needs to be the work output. It needs to be looking and working with your people, asking them questions, watching what they're doing, feeling how they're feeling, all of those sorts of things. And so you can review those workloads and those staffing levels. And I think that's the main thing with going into this psychosocial hazards, you know, injury management and people management. Although there's a people element and a connection element, it has always been quite process driven. And it's always been quite regimented and structured. Whereas when we're going into the world of psychosocial hazards, it's more about feeling. It's more about connecting with your employees. Yes, you have to have the systems in place. Not going to deny. Yes, you have to have the structure in place. But you also need to be able to feel what's going on in your business. And that's also a really good sign of a good leader, is having that ability to feel what's happening. So the last part of the presentation, why should I care? Why should you care about psychosocial hazards in your workplace? Well, as I mentioned before, you have a legal obligation. You're legally obliged to make sure that your workplace is safe, and not just physical safety, but also psychological safety. So that's just actually changing, and that legislation, as I mentioned, comes out on the 31st of March. So you need to have your risk assessments in place before then. You need to have your controls being implemented before then. You know, if they're not implemented, you need to be able to show how they're being implemented. What's the implementation or the action plan that goes with that? You know, that's going to show that you actually are working on it. You are progressing and doing what you need to do. Reduced incidents. You know, I haven't met one company that hasn't wanted to reduce incidents in their business. They're costly, right? They're costly. They take up time. They take up resources that often end up in damaged equipment or injured people. You know, so you're not only reducing incidences around psychological safety, but you're also reducing incidences across the board. Or when people, as I mentioned before, a lot of incidents are actually determined by someone's psychological state. And so you're able to do that. You can improve performance, improve creativity, retention of staff, social responsibility. You can actually do what we should do as humans. You know, I believe that there's more to us than just our day-to-day. And I believe that there is some higher power out there. And with that comes, for me, this oneness, this connection. We're all here for some kind of purpose. We're all here to serve each other in some kind of way. And there is that social obligation or social responsibility, rather, for businesses to be able to provide workplaces for their employees that don't harm them in any way, physically or psychologically. And I mean, if you were able to then take it that next step further, which we're kind of doing now with this new legislation and starting to really invest in your employees' well-being, imagine the rewards that brings your organisation. Can you imagine someone, you know, goes home to their partner and they're happy, you know, even more intimate maybe, and they're connecting with their family more, and they've got a better family life, then they come back into the work without family issues, so they're able to work and be more present. And they go home and it just has this cycle that just creates this real healthiness within them. That improves your productivity in the workplace. I mean, many people say, you know, we've got all these people here. And I've seen businesses that have employed more people and haven't had more output purely because their people aren't present when they're at work. So it's not just about absenteeism, it's about presenteeism as well. It's about when your people are at work, they're performing. They're doing what you need them to do. And you need to be able to foster an environment where they're doing this without you watching, because as businesses grow, the director or the CEO can't be everywhere. They can't be looking at everything. And that is a really costly area to the business that people don't actually realize is something that they can really shift. It can really save them money and improve their productivity. And so, as I mentioned before, the resources that I've used for this presentation have come from DENIS and WorkSafe WA, and you can go onto their website and search mentally healthy workplaces, and they will come up with those 3 codes of practice that I mentioned earlier: the psychosocial hazards in the workplace, the violence and aggression at work, and also workplace behaviour. And if you have any questions or queries, I'm happy to just have a chat with you. If you wanted to run past, you know, some of your risk assessments, although in these codes of practice, there are examples of risk assessments. There are examples of those psychological hazards that I mentioned before. There's some really, these 3 here have some really great material that even someone that isn't experienced in risk assessments and in the world of safety can really utilise and create some greatness in their organisation. Create compliance, but not only compliance, but also increase and improve all of those things we mentioned before: productivity, creativity, absenteeism, presenteeism, and just your employees' wellbeing, overall wellbeing. So thank you very much for your time today. As I said, if you've got any questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out.